Hello everyone, my name is Luisa Jiménez Cubría and welcome to this tech-in named Teaching with Intention, Designing Purposeful ELT Lessons Through Backwards Planning, where we will get to know the basics of this type of design and hopefully you will get some better and more engaging lessons. Let's get started. So to begin with, I would like to say that all teachers plan. In some degree or another, all teachers plan their lessons, maybe even the ones who hate to plan. Maybe they don't do it on paper, but necessarily in their heads, there is a rough sketch of what their lessons will look like. However, most of us follow the more traditional way of planning without even realizing that we are doing it. And so to first get an idea of what is this backwards planning we are going to talk about, we have to ask, what is it? Do we have any idea? Have we heard about it before? And if you haven't, let's imagine this scenario. You decide to go on a trip. What are you going to decide first? Most likely, you're going to decide where you want to go, your destination, right? And then you're going to plan your route to get there. You're either going to go by plane or by bus or by car. And you are going to decide how to get from point A to point B. So this is basically the essence of backwards planning. We decide what we want to get out of our class, and then we decide how we are going to get there. However, in the style of planning that most of us follow, which is traditional planning, we first decide how we are going to get there, and until the very end, we decide our destination, which makes no real sense, right? But if we plan this way, how will we know when we have arrived at our destination? Because we don't even know what it is. That's why we are going to teach you about backwards planning in this session. In traditional planning, this is more or less the route that we follow. It's the step one. We're going to identify the topic or chunk of content that needs to be covered or that we want to cover. The second step is that we are going to plan out a sequence of lessons that teach that content. And the third and final step is that we are going to create an assessment to measure that learning that should have taken place over the lessons that we covered. And when we follow this route, what happens? The assessment is created after the lessons are planned, and sometimes that isn't even created until most of the lessons have taken place. We usually design exams until the very end of the period when all of our classes have already happened. So the assessment part is kind of an afterthought to all of our lessons, and we just use it to check if our students were kind of paying attention to the stuff we taught them, right? For example, when we teach vocabulary in class, we teach them all of the words and we cover their meaning, right? And then when we have a vocabulary exam, we ask students to apply that vocabulary in context. And well, then some problems arise. Why? Because then our students don't know how to do that, because in class we just saw meaning, right? And then in the exam, we are asking them either to apply vocabulary in context or fill in some gaps with the vocabulary words. However, that is not how we taught our students to work with those words in class. And to us as teachers and as language experts, it seems like an obvious jump to go from meaning to context, right? But for our students, it's a titanic labor, which most of them will not be able to perform because they have not taken the necessary steps to get there. When we plan in this traditional way of planning, we are more likely to include content and activities that will have questionable value to our students. There will be a lack of durable and transferable learning and meaning for our students in what they saw. And overall, we will see poor student engagement. Why? Because they will feel disappointed or frustrated in either the results or the lack of knowledge that they are presenting. And some of the common issues that we get to see with traditional planning are that we are racing to cover the maximum number of pages or of units or of lessons that we have in our books. And therefore, we are performing haphazard activities with our students, just like fill in this exercise, complete these sentences, memorize these verbs. They have no true meaning for their learning. We are focusing on multiple choice sort of testing, and we fail to help our students actually apply or contextualize the knowledge that they are acquiring through our lessons. Most of us as teachers, we plan just to plan. Why? This is a big concern because it's something that we have to do, right? It's either just for the sake of planning or because we have to comply with some administrative demand that the school has for us. But planning should really be more than that. It should be a much more meaningful process than that. It should be a carefully structured process and a thoughtful process, because planning is the base of all teaching. And it should be really aimed and focused on the students at the center of the learning process. And that's exactly where backwards planning comes in. The difference that we are going to see in the order of the actions in backwards planning is very significant. It's not just another planning method, but we are going to see a very effective result when we use backwards planning. In backwards planning, we are first going to plan the assessment, and only then can we plan the lessons that will contribute to the success of those lessons with our students in class. We are going to design our test or our assessments first, and then we are going to figure out whatever activities we need to have with our students in order to get them there. This is so that we have a clearer view of what we are aiming for and the path that we need to take in order to get us there. Backwards planning basically has 3 stages to the planning sequence. The first one is going to create student-focused learning goals or objectives. The second one is to set the assessment methods or the evaluations. And the third and last one is going to be to create lessons and activity. We are going to look a bit more into each of these steps now. So for the first one, that is create student-focused learning goals. These goals can include all types of contents and standards, from the language curriculum that we have to cover all the way to any social emotional learning skills or knowledge that you or your institution wishes that the students will learn by the end of the course. And these student-centered goals should be included in your lesson plans in the form of objectives. These objectives should always include the behavior or skills that we want your students to display. This means the behavior such as sharing with classmates any type of knowledge or be able to present, right? The method through which our students are going to get there, such as using a specific formula or tool, and the level of performance that we want each of our students to demonstrate during the class, meaning the level of mastery we want our students to have when we finish the lesson. This can include, for example, a number of correct answers or something else entirely, like a certain grade on a test, right? The second step that we are going to have is set the assessment methods. We are going to do this prior to designing our lessons and our instructions. We need to determine how we will know if our students have achieved the desired learning results. And this has to consider a range of assessment types and approaches to the assessment. Another part of setting these assessment methods is that when we are deciding on which assessment to use, we need to ask ourselves these questions as teachers. What do I plan to teach each of my students, and why do I plan to teach it? Because sometimes we just teach for teaching, right? Because it's part of the curriculum that I have to teach, but we don't give greater thought to why we are doing it. So first we need to think of why we are teaching something and why we are teaching it the way we are. Is it actually working or not? Evaluate that part. And the second one is how I'm going to measure the proficiency that my students have in each of the tested areas or in each of the areas that I'm interested in my students to have. And just as a note, remember that an assessment should not always be limited to a test or a written quiz. Evaluations come in all shapes and sizes. Another part of setting the assessment methods is that we have, for example, the basic assessments that measure factual knowledge and discrete skills, such as quizzes, tests, and skills check. We also have the open-ended academic prompts requiring that students think, analyze, and synthesize information. And finally, we also have the performance tasks and projects that are designed to demonstrate the actual understanding and application of the knowledge or skill that we have taught our students in different types of contexts. And we need to discriminate as teachers which of these we want to measure in our students so that we can choose the right one for our planning. If we don't want to measure application of understanding, then we probably won't do a project, and then we can do a more open-ended question or a multiple choice test. It's important to have that discrimination of which one we are interested in, which one will help us better know if our students gain the knowledge, so that we don't apply the wrong type of evaluation for the wrong type of knowledge. And the final part of setting these assessment methods is that while a unit or lesson, yes, of course, should be anchored by a performance task or a project or a quiz, something that tells us how the student actually performed, the assessment evidence should be gathered over time rather than we view it as a one-time culminating event. Our students are more, they are more of the sum of all class events rather than just an exam or just a project. We should always have a diversity and a good quantity of material to evaluate them with rather than just one thing. And finally, for this part is that assessment is a two-way street. What do I mean with this? This is going to help you, assessing your students is going to help you two ways. One is going to help you improve the students' results, but the second one is that it's also going to help you improve your teaching. If you have been assessing them with the same type of instrument, meaning, for example, an exam, and your students are not getting good results, that type of evaluation tells you as much as it does for the students that it tells you about the way that you are teaching. So it's important that you as a teacher consider these results, not just to evaluate the students' performance, but also to evaluate your own performance as a teacher and to reevaluate how you're going to move forward with your lessons and with your planning from that point on, if you need to change or correct track at any point of the school year. And the third and final step of backwards planning is to create the lessons and activities. This is going to be based on the desired learning results that you established earlier and the evidence of learning that you have identified so far. Then you're going to plan which activities and which paths to move forward on. And this is going to be based on what I want my students to know. And it's going to help me make better decisions of how to get there and how not to get there. If I see that my students particularly don't work well with a certain type of class activity or of evaluation, I should not move forward with that because I am not going to get good results on it. The other part of planning these learning experiences and instructions is going to ask myself what type of instruction and activities will help my students acquire these big ideas that I want them to, and to transfer their learning into actual things in real life, to put knowledge into action, right? So is it going to be direct instruction? Is it going to be guided practice? Is it going to be discussion? Maybe cooperative learning? All types of instructions can help different types of students to get there. And we need to be able to change with every activity, with every topic, the types of activity that we have, so that our students have this variety. And at the end of the day, we can cover all types of learners in our classroom, because that is a necessity that, as we all know, we have today in our classrooms. So for example, if I want my students to make use of a specific verb tense correctly, having them drill the verbs over and over again, their verb list, is probably not the best activity to get them to actually use that verb tense correctly, right? So I need to find a way to get them on the right track with the right type of activity. And another part of the planning learning experiences is that the more we supplement the students' learning with other materials and resources beyond just our textbook, we have a better chance of making that learning process meaningful. We can do this with gamification, we can do this with some extra activities, with some fun projects, but we should always try to go further than what the book has, right? And always try to remember, have in the back of your head, how am I going to use the assessments that I already have to provide better feedback to my students? And this feedback has to be ongoing. Sometimes also a problem that we have as teachers is that we leave the feedback until the very end, right? After they have already taken the test. then there is not really much of a point to giving feedback then, because they already took the test and they already have a grade. The feedback should be constant from the moment that the lesson starts until the moment that we give them back their tests. So how exactly are we going to implement this backwards planning in our classrooms? We have defined what it is and what is not. And now we are going to see the stages or steps more specifically, so that we know exactly how to do this in our classrooms. I want to remind you that good planning starts with good objectives. This is the most important part of backwards planning, is setting and writing good objectives. In this part, we have three types of objectives. We have the general or main one, which is the main idea. It's clear, it's concise, and it's going to point out the end goal of the lesson or of the school year or whatever we are writing it about. The second one are the particular objectives. And these ones, we are going to point out the main idea of each unit, and it's going to show the objective of the previous one, of the main or of the general one. The sum of all of the particular objectives should give us the aim of the general or the main one. And the last one are the specific objectives. They should detail the process and steps that we are going to take in order to get or to achieve the general objective. So as you can see, they're kind of the specific objectives are the steps to get to the particular objective, and the particular are the steps to get to the general or main objective. They're all very similar, but they are not interchangeable. And we do need to make note of which one is which, so that we can plan correctly in our lessons. So let's have a look at some common ELT objectives that I have seen in lesson planning over the years in ELT classrooms. So for example, I have the first one that says students learn past progressive. The second one says use comparatives and superlatives. And the third one says to know what is the passive voice. What is not right here? Well, many things are not right here, but let's start with saying that the objectives are the main part of your lesson plan. They are the backbone of your lesson plan. And they need to be written so clear and so precisely that anyone teaching your class, for example, let's say that you are sick one day and you cannot go to class, but somebody is having a look at your lesson plan, anybody who sees that lesson plan and reads your objectives will know exactly what you're going to do during your lessons and how you're going to do it, because your objectives would lead them straight to that. That's how clear we need to write them. So if we just read this objectives here, they don't tell us much. Students learn past progressive. How? Use comparatives and superlatives. To do what? To know what is the passive voice. Know is a very broad verb. How do we evaluate what know is for each student? So we need to get better at stating our objectives. How we are going to implement this better writing of objectives? Well, we need three things to write a good objective. We need a verb, we need a knowledge, and we need a skill. So for example, here we have write is the verb, the knowledge is passive voice, and the skill would be writing, right? Another example would be the verb would be memorize, the knowledge would be irregular verbs, and the skills required there would be visualization and spaced repetition. Once you have these three things clear, you can start writing better objectives. So to do so, you will need this: the verb, the knowledge or the skill, the word by, and then the student activity that will be performed in order to get this first part. So for example, we would have students use the passive voice by writing sentences after using a model. Or students memorize irregular verbs by doing oral drills. I am choosing the correct verb for the correct type of activity. And I'm also stating this very clearly. If I write this in my lesson plan, students use the passive voice by writing sentences after following a model. Anyone who teaches my class would be able to know that they first need to teach the students the model so that then they by themselves can write sentences by using the passive voice. It is really as simple as that. Now that we have developed these objectives a bit further and they give us this clearer idea of what our students will be doing, the only kind of tricky part of backwards planning is the use of verbs. And here comes a part that I think most teachers are very familiar with, which is Bloom's taxonomy. And just as a refresher, Bloom's taxonomy is this hierarchical framework of classifying educational goals that was developed in 1956 by Benjamin Bloom. And this categorizes learning objectives, basically, right? We need to have a good understanding of this in order to write better objectives. So this is just kind of a pyramid of our students' knowledge and how they are going to get there, right? First, they need to remember, then they need to understand for them to apply, and they need to apply, in order to analyze and to evaluate. They need to analyze, and to create, they need to evaluate, right? It's this just order that our students or our own minds follow in order to think. So this is kind of a very complex thing, and we can go for hours and hours talking about Bloom's taxonomy, but a simpler way of doing it is just looking for these lists that are available online. This is just to make our lives a little bit easier. The verbs have been classified by the type or the level of cognitive complexity that each one represents for our students. So for example, for the first level, that is knowledge, we have verbs such as define, identify, describe, recognize. For the second level, that is understand, we have classify, compare, contrast, infer. And then we go on and on to the last ones. For example, the fifth one, which is evaluate, we have criticize, refrain, judge, defend, appraise. And the last one, that is the last level of complexity, of cognitive complexity, is create. And then we have verbs such as design, modify, role play, develop, rewrite. This is going to give us a better idea of which verbs we can use when we are stating our objectives, so that they are better aimed to what we actually want our students to do in class. So when we are writing these high-level outcomes that we want to do so that our lesson plans are better, we can use this Bloom's taxonomy. It's important to remember that a well-written outcome will always help us deem what is appropriate in the terms of tasks and in the terms of evaluation, so that it's more targeted to the learning experience that we actually want to create for our students. It's important to choose the right verb for each objective, since it will guide everything forward in the lesson. It's, as I said before, it's the backbone of the actual lesson plan. And a quick and simple method for writing these objectives, it's called the ABC standard, in which A stands for audience, who is the target audience of the lesson. B is behavior. What exactly do I expect from this class, from my students in this class? C is the condition. Is there a particular method which they should use to perform their behavior? For example, using a rubric or a template or a protocol. The last one is D, which stands for degree. That is, to which degree is that behavior expected to be performed? I'm going to give you a quick and easy example. After this segment of the session, all of you participants will be able to write clear learning objectives using the ABC method, in which the A, which is my audience, in yellow are the participants, it's clearly stated here. The behavior or the verb, it's in green, it's write. The condition, it's in blue, it's using the ABC method. I'm clearly stating how they should do it. And the degree is in pink, and I'm saying that it should be clear learning objectives. What it's important to note here is that the only part here which is optional when writing the objectives is the degree, but I would highly advise you to use it so that it just makes things clear for you, so that we can always write to which degree we expect our students to master that proficiency that we want from them, right? So this is just to make things clearer for us, but also for the students, so that we are not aiming the bar too high or too low for what we are actually expecting from this lesson. And always, always, always double check your objectives. What do I mean with this? Is your objective specific? Is your objective measurable? And is your objective attainable? After we have written them, we should always double check in order to know if they are good to go or not. Simply answer yes or no to any of these questions. If in any of the three questions the answer is no, this indicates an opportunity for you to rephrase the verb and to clarify, rephrase the outcome and to clarify the outcome so that it means all of these three criteria so that we can actually get started with the rest of the planning. So what do we mean by the objective being specific? Are the learning outcomes clear enough to what the goal is? Be very, very careful of using words like understand and know. Why? Because they are very broad. They are very open to interpretation. I can think that for my students to know present simple is to know the formula and the S in the third person and all of the verbs in present simple and whatever else, right? And for them, it might just be good enough to know that he, she, it take an S with the verb, right? So we should always try to be as specific as possible with our objective and just not use these words because they're very open. We don't know what each of us understand for all of them. Another thing of objectives being specific is that what our students need to do or say to demonstrate that they actually understood what you meant with this objective, right? The answer should always provide you with more specific objectives if the answer here is no. Your objectives should be measurable. If a learning outcome is not measurable, then you will not be able to know whether or not your course or your lesson or your unit was successfully achieved in its goals. And this does not mean that the goal has to be measured quantitatively by any measuring instrument. As the course designer, you are the one who decides what measurements will best work for your subject or for that lesson. Valid and accepted measurements will vary from discipline to discipline and can include both quantitative and qualitative measures. It doesn't really matter. And one more important thing to mention here is that at the end of the day, the important thing here is that we find some way to identify whether or not the learning outcome has been met. And last but not least is that it should be attainable. Learning outcomes should be achievable for the students in your class and achievable in the time that you have for your subject. And also that crafting these realistic learning outcomes requires some understanding of the prior knowledge that your students have in your subject. And in this regard, it's advisable to always add an objective at the beginning of the class that allows you to explore the previous knowledge that your students have in that specific topic or subject. And just remember that an unrealistic learning outcome will set up your students up for failure. We have control over how we teach. If we do not plan correctly, the learning will not take place. Now it's time to backwards plan your lesson. What do my students need to do in order to prove mastery of the objective? And what do I as a teacher need to do in order to get them there? With my objectives done and dusted, now I can start planning which activities will be more likely to get me to those objectives and which will definitely not do so. And just as a quick reminder of the lessons, the stages of lesson planning. First, we have the beginning of the lesson in which we identify the previous knowledge and experiences that are related to the topic I'm going to cover during my lesson. And I'm going to state the knowledge that I'm expecting my students to be achieved in class. I think this is an important topic that we are always taught as teachers that we have to do, and we rarely do, is sharing the objective with my class. By the end of the class, I expect you to be able to write sentences using past progressive after following the model I gave you, right? We should always share with them what is expected of them so that they also have a clearer idea of what they are going to actually do in class and how they're going to get there. And also state the specific objective, and besides just that, the importance of what they are going to learn, how it's going to help them relate that knowledge to other knowledge that they may have, and how they are going to be evaluated at the end of the lesson or at the end of the unit or at the end of the class. It's also very important for them to know so that they can themselves get prepared for it with time. Then we have the actual development of the class. This is the part that takes the longest, of course. And here is where cognitive and subject skills are going to be put into practice, the ones that we have written in our objectives. And the activities that are done during this part should give students the opportunity to practice, to rehearse, to elaborate, build, and appropriate the class knowledge and contents, and to put them into relation with other subjects or other knowledge that they already have from other classes or other subjects. And then we have the closing of the class, which the main objective here is to establish all the knowledge, meaning that we should make sure that all the knowledge that we wanted is actually there, and to go through all of the learning process and highlight the most important parts. So what does this mean? It means sort of review with them. Today we saw this topic and we saw it by doing this exercise and that exercise, and we saw this rule, and then we went to do a practice, right? Just highlight all of these most important parts for them to recall what they have learned. Reinforce the key knowledge that we saw during the class, clear out any questions that may still be up in the air, and extend the information if needed. If we see that our students can push a bit forward with the topic, have the opportunity to do so, go for it. And also encourage students on the positive aspects that they did during the class, right? If they answered correctly, if they had good behavior, if they paid attention, if they all took notes, just reinforce that good behavior so that there is a positive environment during the class. One important thing to note here is that you should always include timelines and schedules in your backwards planning, because time management is a crucial element of this type of planning. Always try to include how long is it going to take you, or how long you think it's going to take you to go through each activity or each part, so that you have a rough outline of what your class will look like, and so that you can plan better in the future. And just to conclude, it is a very purposeful type of planning. It ensures that lessons are well aligned with very clear learning goals. It is completely student-centered. It focuses on the desired learning outcomes rather than just one-off activities that don't really get our students anywhere. It has very effective assessment because it encourages designing assessments that actually measure understanding, because we are planning before we actually do. It has meaningful learning because it promotes these engaging and relevant learning experiences, because the students will be able to actually see progress as they go through the class, because it is very well designed. And it has a reflective practice, meaning that it supports continuous improvement, both of the student and of the teacher, throughout evaluation and adjustment. And lastly, it empowers student success. It helps both educators and students achieve the desired learning outcomes. And well, just as a quick reminder to end this presentation, I would like to tell you that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Always try to have very structured and well-planned lessons so that each of your classes is more meaningful and more engaging for your students. I hope that you enjoyed the session and that you have a great BBELT 2025. Thank you.